morning, everyone. Let's start with a quote from America's favorite humorist. When I was a boy of 14, my father was so ignorant. It's hard to stand to be around the old man. But when I got to be 21, I was amazed at how much he had learned in 7 years. That quote is from Mark Twain. My father was born John Edward Montagne. His parents were Althea and Roy. And he grew up in South Dakota on a beautiful Oxbow Lake of the Missouri River in a very small house. It was so small, in fact, that he didn't even have his own bedroom. But they were, have an outhouse. As so many older people might remember our parents telling us about it. It was such a beautiful location that my grandparents continued to live there even into their 80s. Now, you live on a lake and you like the water. It can be a mighty fun time. Boating, fishing, swimming. Do those in the summer. And when the winter comes, there's ice boat sailing and skating. So there was always something to do on that lake. Now, my grandmother taught swimming. And where she taught swimming at was in Sioux City, Iowa, which was just 10 miles away from where the lake was. And in fact, she taught a good share of the people in Sioux City how to swim. So she was somewhat of a celebrity. So my father had to take to the water like an otter, because that was the only choice he had. And he did it with gusto. Now, thinking back to my own earliest memories, I can remember walking on Puget Sound. My folks had bought an old fixer-upper beach house right there on the Sound. And you could look out and see the Olympic Mountains in the distance. And I would go down at low tide with my dad. We'd walk and look at the little pools of water where the little fish and other creatures were. And sometimes we even find octopus under the rocks. Those were very memorable moments for me, very precious moments. Dad also had a wooden cabin cruiser that he kept moored out in the Sound just in front of our house. Problem with that boat was it had a very noisy, smelly, with a tanker's engine. I didn't learn much from that, because when I first sailing, it had a tanker's engine. Speaking of corporal punishment, I don't ever remember my father talking about being punished by whipping or spanking. In fact, my grandfather was one of the gentlest and gentlemanly like persons I've ever known. And my grandmother, on the other hand, was very busy whipping my dad in shape. She was the swim instructor, and she expected Dad to be a swimming and diving champion. And he actually would go on to become a state diving champion. Never say that our ancestors don't have a hand in how we turn out and how that can pass through the generations. Now, for me, yes, I can remember a few cases of corporal punishment. One was playing with fires. The other was chopping the neighbor's tree down. I had an early interest in wood, shall we say, whether it be set on fire or chopping the tree down. But all in all, I had a very benign childhood. But Dad had his peculiarities. Can't say that he didn't. When he was in his early 20s, he and his cousin set out for California to help in the war effort on his Harley Davidson motorcycle. If you can imagine two guys driving out on a Harley Davidson motorcycle across the Midwest to California. They stopped in Yellowstone Park to take in the sights. While there, Dad spotted a black bear rummaging through a garbage can. And not having his thinking cap on, he decided to get on the bear's back and ride it like a horse. Dad thought it might be a good idea. The bear thought otherwise. And Dad got off lightly with just a gruff drop. The father also learned to fly when he was 14 years old from a neighbor. So he ended up flying Corsairs from the Pacific Theater during the Great War. He got to do something he loved, but at the same time got a first-hand look of the terror of war, and it stuck with him. He retired as a captain. Our father's working years, and yes, I have a brother and sister, so I need to use power as well as mine. We're dedicated to raising our family and to working at Cape Canaveral. Dad was there for the Mercury, the Gemini, and the Apollo missions. He was part of a team that helped us to leave our planet, go to the moon, and to set our sights on the stars. But Dad had some great adventures after retirement. He and Mom traveled around in their RV a lot, saw a lot of places. One thing he did that dovetailed with me was when I was out in the Bahamas one time on my sailboat, I had lost the crew. They had to go back, and Dad flew out to help me bring my sailboat back. So we had 3 weeks together. We got to do lots of sailing, fishing, and of course, swimming. So I will finish up my story about my dad with this little ditty. We were out spearfishing together along a coral reef. Dad had speared small fish. Unfortunately, a barracuda had come along, a nice big 5-foot barracuda, and he wanted that fish. But Dad didn't want to give up his fish, so he thought, well, I'm smarter than that barracuda. So he took that fish, which was still wriggling on the spear, and he put it behind his back, thinking, out of sight, out of mind. But he didn't have his hand quite correct, and he had it too high. The fish popped up above his head, so the barracuda could see the fish. And being only 6 feet away with those 1-inch teeth and sitting there motionless with just his gills moving, Dad must have thought back to the time of that black bear and decided that maybe this time he'd let the barracuda come out ahead. Thank you.
Thank you for that remembrance. And glad to hear he survived it. Well, wisely the second time. We're also going to hear from Karen Lambie today. Karen, come and share with us.
Good morning. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah.
Because I don't have a very loud voice. Well, I'm here to talk about foster fathers. And most specifically, Tom Lambie as a foster father. So Tom, if you won't stand up, would you at least raise your hand? Thank you. Unfortunately, Tom and I were never able to have our own children. I never got over wanting to take care of infants, and still, to this day, when I see a baby, I want to grab up that baby and take care of it. So if you have any babies, and I'm around, you need to watch that baby. One day, someone mentioned to me that we could become foster parents. So one day in December of 2002, I called Bullitt County DFACS and found out that they were starting classes in January of 2003. At that time, both Tom and I were already 50 years old. I went home and I told Tom I wanted us to become foster parents, and mostly to infants. And he uttered not a word, but he looked at me as though I had grown 3 heads. And I told him that classes were starting in January, and that the next classes would not be until the summer. And he said, well, couldn't we wait until the summer? And I said, no. I told him we were already enrolled in the January classes, so we had no choice. Throughout the classes, Tom would lean over to me and say, what are we getting ourselves into? And then after a couple of more weeks, I started doing the same thing. I would lean over to Tom and say, what are we getting ourselves into? So sometimes you hear all kinds of negative stories about foster parents. And sadly, a lot of these stories are true. But I want you to know that there are some wonderful foster families out there. There are some wonderful foster fathers. I want to tell a couple of quick stories about Tom as a foster father. We got our first baby. He was 2 weeks old. And it was the first day that we had him. And I was holding the baby. And I had to go do something else. And so I turned to Tom and I said, here, take the baby. And he did. And when I got back into the room, Tom was still holding the baby. And you know, when you put your finger into the palm of an infant, that infant will grasp your finger. So Tom knew about that, and so that's what he was doing. I was over with this baby. Later that night, much to my surprise, Tom told me that that was the first baby that he had ever had. And Tom even got that standing rocking position, you know, this one. he could do that perfectly. And, all of you who have had infants know that sometimes that they can be fed, they can have a clean diaper, but they are still screaming and hollering and yelling and crying. And you can walk them, you can rock them, you can play music for them, and the crying doesn't stop. And a lot of the time, it's what I call emotional crying. And I just, when I would hear that emotional crying, it would make me cry. And Tom would turn to me, he would take the baby, and he would say to me, go outside. So I would go outside, and I would sing and song. And after about 5 or 10 minutes, I would start feeling a little bit guilty. So I would think, I can't leave Tom with this screaming, crying baby, so I need to go back in. So I would open the door and stick my head in and listen. And most of the time, I didn't hear a crying baby. So I would go in and Tom would be sitting in his chair watching television. And I would say, where's the baby? And Tom would say, oh, the baby is asleep in his or her bed. So if any of you have infants right now, Tom is the baby whisperer. Tom is proof. I wasn't going to do this. Tom is proof that a child doesn't have to be bone of your bones, blood of your blood, flesh of your flesh, to love that child as though it were your own. Tom is a shining example of this. Happy Father's Day. Love you.